Good morning. Morning. Morning, everyone. Welcome to InterAction 2015. My name is Brian Cute. I'm the CEO of Public Interest Registry. Very glad to see you here. Good morning. I hope you've had your coffee. Welcome to what's going to be absolutely the best, most important workshop you attend while you're here, without a doubt. I'm Brian Cute, the CEO of Public Interest Registry, and I want to tell you just a little bit about ourselves to kick it off, and then I'm going to introduce our three panelists. And what we're going to do for the next hour and a half is, with our panelists, give each of them about 10 to 15 minutes to give a very informative presentation. But what we want to do ultimately is leave at least 20 minutes or more for Q&A. Because the fact of the matter is here you have absolute experts in their field in front of you, and you have a big opportunity to learn things that can really help your organization and what you do online. So we want to maximize the time you have to ask questions or really get into some of the nitty-gritty of how to be effective with your online presence. So with that, let me tell you a little bit about Public Interest Registry if you don't know who we are already. We are a not-for-profit ourselves, and we are the operator of the .org address on the internet. So we handle all of the 10.5 million addresses and all of the queries to .org websites every day. And we've been doing that for about 14 years. What we just introduced into the market on May 6th was a service called OnGood. And what it is an exclusive set of services for NGOs that will use a .ngo or .ong in Romance language speaking countries address on the internet where NGOs can be found now. It's exclusive. They will be validated to get the domain name, and they will also have a profile page, be put in a searchable directory, and have a Donate Now button at their disposal. So all of those elements for an NGO to be visible and found and connect with donors online. And that's the service OnGood that we're very excited about. And what really makes me excited about the conversation today is the work that we did in the last 3 years. Before launching this, we did outreach to all the regions around the world and had workshops with NGOs and really asked them what their online challenges were. And we heard very consistent messages everywhere we went. The two most consistent messages is I need to be trusted online. Absolutely across the board, the number one thing, I need to be trusted. And then the second and most obvious, I got to connect with donors. I have to raise funds. I know that the internet is a great platform and that online donations are increasing, but these were the two consistent messages that we heard. And what I want to share with you are a couple of statistics about what being online is like today. And these are basic things that you already know or you probably have a sense of, but these are just some basic facts today. On a daily basis, there are 3.5 billion Google searches. There are over 250 million registered domain names on the internet. 10.5 million of those are .orgs. There are nearly 1 billion websites. There are over 1 billion Facebook users. There are 280 million Twitter users. And those are just the main platforms. The reality is today, the internet is a rapidly expanding ocean of data. And being online is not enough. You've got to be visible, you've got to be found, and you've got to connect with your stakeholder, with your audience, with your customer. And you've got to be very good at all of those three things. And that's the point, and that's the frame for today's discussion. How do you do that well? Particularly if you're a not-for-profit or an NGO that doesn't have an IT staff or experts at your disposal. It's critical. Just being online doesn't do it anymore. So, very excited about the panelists that we have here because they are going to explain to you from a few different vectors how to do that well. And then again, we'll leave some time for some Q&A. The first speaker we have is Heather Mansfield, who is with nonprofit Tech for Good. She is a blogger and social media trainer extraordinaire. We have been collaborating with Heather ourselves at Public Interest Registry, and I can tell you she's an absolute wealth of information about social media platforms and how to use them well. So we're going to hear from Heather first. Next, we'll hear from Melanie Mitchell, who is a digital marketing consultant. She's going to focus on SEO and content optimization. And Melanie and I happened to work together years ago at Network Solutions, back in the early 2000s, I think it was. So we'll be hearing from Melanie second. And then third, we'll hear from Andrew Marshall, who is with One. And he is a senior director of global digital content. He's going to focus on email. So we're going to touch on a number of different topics that can help you be very effective online, and then we'll leave some time for Q&A. So let's kick it off with Heather.
All right, good morning. How are you? Anytime I give a talk on social media, I have to ask first. I just have to poll people to see where they're at. So I'm going to go through a series of polls real quick, okay? First of all, do you work at a small NGO? Small? Okay, tight budgets, you're doing like 10 different things, right? Okay. Medium size? Medium? Okay, how about large? Who's the large? I'm just curious. Okay. Oh, yeah. I took a picture of your ad in the airport yesterday. Yes. All right. I'm sorry. Save the Children. Excellent. Really good on Twitter. And I love your annual motherhood report. Okay. So that's helpful. Most of the people in the audience are probably pretty stretched thin when it comes to online communications and having a budget for that. How about using Facebook for your organization? Longer than 3 years. Most of you. How about Twitter? Yeah, okay. YouTube? Right? How about Periscope? We're doing it right now for the first time, by the way, so that's pretty interesting. Okay, so that's useful to me because today's session is revitalizing your online presence. So I'm not going to tell you things that you already know. You've been using these tools for a minimum of 3 years. So the whole context is, what do you do if you've been using these tools for 3 or more years, right? So in terms of revitalizing, there were 3 things that popped out at me. And number one that I think about a lot, and that I'm guilty of, I remember in my first book, I was like, be human, right? Have a human voice, have personality. And when I hear that now as a brand like Save the Children or UNICEF or a small NGO trying to go on Twitter and being like a charming personality is just really difficult. Right? And very few people can pull that off. People that have a lot of followers, that have been on Twitter for a while, they're good comedians, they're controversial, but for a brand, an NGO brand, meaning you're on Twitter, you're on Facebook behind the avatar, behind the logo of your organization, you don't have to be human. And this is almost controversial, right? If I say to you, go on Twitter and broadcast, people would gasp, oh my God, what's she saying? But what I have found over the last couple of years is that social media is changing, and it will continue to change daily. And who's getting retweeted, who's getting repinned, who's getting shared on Facebook, which is the ultimate goal, to get shared, to get repinned, to get retweeted, is the NGOs that share the best content. Right? So knowing how to post good content, knowing how to curate good content, and knowing how to broadcast good content. So even if Save the Children has an excellent infographic, but the One campaign also has one, understanding that retweeting the One campaign is not detrimental to your organization, right? It benefits your organization because you are representing a cause. So think about the causes that you represent and just become an expert source on Twitter, on Facebook for those causes. Does that make sense? So in terms of revitalizing, thinking about what you're doing today, like when's the last time you tweeted a really great New York Times article with a picture? When's the last time you went on the internet and actually found a really excellent infographic that someone else created and posted it on Facebook? If you're a small NGO, you don't have the $5,000 to invest in that infographic. Other organizations and news organizations do. So there's plenty of content for you to use to revitalize your online campaign. The second point I wanted to make, and we all know this, is embracing visual content. And just in today's and yesterday's conference, looking at the tweets and what got retweeted the most under the hashtag were tweets that had images. that were properly sized, 600 pixels by 300 pixels, right? So if you've never had the experience of hiring a graphic designer, let's say you do Giving Tuesday this year, right? How many of you last year actually created Photoshop documents or hired a graphic designer to create 500 pixel by 500 pixel Facebook images to promote Giving Tuesday and 600 pixel by 300 pixel images to promote Giving Tuesday on Twitter, right? Understanding that now text just isn't enough, saying, it's Giving Tuesday, make a donation to us, right? Actually saying, it's Giving Tuesday, please make a donation, and then an infographic that shows what you've done over that last year. The brain has really changed. It's fascinating to me that just in the last 5 years, and there's more data coming out about this, about how social media and texting is changing our brains and how we read text and how we read images. So that's really important, and my advice to you is if you can do it, hire a graphic designer, or even in DC, it was 15 years ago, I took a class here, it was $400 for 2 days to learn Adobe Photoshop. That $400 investment 15 years ago is probably the best investment that my employer ever made in me, right? Because 15 years later, I'm still knowing how to use Photoshop. So really understanding a good social media manager doesn't have to be this charismatic, human persona on Twitter that gets a lot of followers, but actually has a voracious passion and desire to consume interesting content on the internet, and then frame their stories in visual content, which leads to the third point, the art and science of social media. And by art, I mean, do you know how to do graphic design? Do you actually know how to take a great quote and put it on top of one of your images and then drag and drop a logo? The art, the graphic design, we all have an inner graphic designer in us that we need to bring out if we're going to be good at social media today, if we're going to revitalize it. And I got to tell you, you can tell I'm a little anal, I follow about 250,000 nonprofits on Twitter. Right, and they're all organized into lists, and so I can go into any category. And I got to say, only probably 1% of NGOs are actually getting it right. And there's the ones that I think of over and over: the World Economic Forum, the Natural Resources Defense Council, the One Campaign. Those are the ones that I can consistently count on good content. So the third part is getting training for this, learning graphic design, and then I want everybody to go and Google the science of social media. Dan Zarella has written numerous white papers and books about the science of how human beings react on social media. Now, I find this fascinating, that you can get more click-throughs if you use a colon versus a semicolon. You'll get more retweets if your tweets are 100 characters or less than if they're more. On Facebook, if you use a properly sized image, you'll get more shares. So knowing the science is really important. So can you put the slide up?
Yep.
And I just want to kind of go off the cuff, and let's analyze this tweet in terms of thinking about revitalizing your campaign. What I'm trying to say here is learn the science, all right? So let's kind of do a group exercise here and analyze this tweet, which I posted on April 6th, 71 retweets and 57 favorites, which is high for me. Right? So that says, hey, people found something interesting and there was something that triggered a response in the online masses to retweet this and favorite it. So let's start analyzing. Does anybody want to throw out some ideas about why this tweet did well? And then I'll tell you the science of it.
Sorry to interrupt, sorry.
Sure.
Could you repeat that? You said Google Science.
Science of social media. And it's also the 3 action items I suggest are on the pieces of paper. Okay? So does anyone want to try? Go ahead, right here.
Hashtag.
All right, so hashtag. Now, we have scientific data that using one and sometimes 2, but one hashtag results in more retweets. So when you go on Twitter or you go on Facebook and you see, international development, international is hashtag development, help alleviate child hunger, child is hashtag, hunger is hashtagged. That is an old way of using Twitter. Hashtags don't have that functionality anymore. So in terms of knowing the science, if you're using more than one hashtag in your tweets, you're actually hurting the likelihood that you will get retweeted or favorited or clicked through. All right, so that's the first piece. How about another one? Yes? It has a map. People love maps. It has an infographic. And what's important is it's properly sized. So the way I created this map was it was a bigger version, right? It was inside of a report. And then I screenshotted it, saved it to my desktop, opened it in Photoshop, shrunk the size, cropped it, and then increased the canvas size so it was 600 pixels by 300 pixels, basically a perfect rectangle, right? So that's what I mean by knowing the art, knowing how to actually do that, because you will get less retweets if, let's say, it was cropped through the middle of Alaska and Mongolia, and then the bottom half of Africa and Australia was cut off, it wouldn't have gotten 71 retweets. So knowing the art and science. How about something else? Yes?
You added like a statement or of value in the headline. So particularly in Europe, you're actually making a comment on what you're seeing.
Yes.
Just saying, this is a map.
Right, exactly. And what I was thinking too, I posted that at a time where Europe was awake. So I wanted to grab the attention of Europe. Like, oh, Heather's talking about, Europe. What is she saying? So it grabbed the attention of people in Europe, but also added a value. Then people that weren't in Europe were like, well, where was the United States stand? Where does Australia stand? So yes, what else? This is one tweet. There's about 10 best practices in this.
People love comparisons.
Yes. So they could compare themselves to other, right? And it's data. People love data, and particularly on anything on online fundraising, right? This is good news, and the world's coming together, and we're giving more money. Another thing is the character content, meaning the typed characters, is less than 80. You get more retweets if your tweets actually have 80 characters or less. You're twice as likely to get retweeted if you have a link. So sourcing any kind of content, right? You can't just say, hey everybody, philanthropy is growing in Europe. I think that's great, exclamation point, hashtag, hashtag, right? Very simple language, almost like a headline with a source, increases the likelihood of it getting retweeted. Let me see if there's anything else. Colons before a link. Dan Zarella found it increased the click-through rate to your website, right? Where they can read your inspiring story, sign up for an email newsletter, possibly make an online donation, then see, hey, we're also on Facebook, like you on Facebook. More click-through rates if you put a colon before the link. And the final point, no abbreviations, complete sentences, and proper grammar. And so when you see a tweet and it's got 2 hashtags, LOL, about ABT, and they're trying to fit all of this in, no picture, that's Twitter circa 2009. So in terms of revitalizing your campaigns, learn the science and get really, really good at it. And the good news is the pressure is off. You don't have to be a celebrity online, right? You can just curate and post really good content about international development, about aid, about what's going on in the world. And if you do it well, people will chime in, they'll pay attention. Okay, that's it. Did I do 15 minutes or less?
Oh yeah.
Okay,
Yeah, we're
awesome.
good. Because I might go a little longer. Does anyone mind if I stand? A little bit. All right. Hi, my name is Melanie Mitchell, and as Brian mentioned, he and I worked together at Network Solutions. And the funny thing is when I was there, I actually got into search by accident, I like to say, because I was working on the marketing team, and they asked, do you know HTML? And I said, yeah. And they said, okay, here, learn this. And this was back in 2000. And I loved it. And the reason why I loved it was because there's so much data that you can get from search, both organic search and paid search, to really understand your audience. And you can then use this information to then use it in other parts of marketing, whether it's your website, whether it's social, and really see what's engaging with people. Not just coming to your website, but what are they doing on your website? And then build upon that. So, I want to talk about search engine optimization in more detail, but also talk about marketing best practices as it ties into your owned media. So not just your website, but also your video, your images, some of these other elements, even social, and optimizing those to make sure that you get found. Because that's the important part, as we know, is that you can have all this great content, great information, wonderful stories, but if no one can find you, then, that's a problem. So one of the things I want to ask, though, is anyone doing SEO today? Have they been doing it a year or less or not at all? So you guys have been doing it at least more than a year. Because we're going to talk about some of the tactics to think about, but also some of the strategies. Because one of the challenges, too, is understanding that audience and making sure that you're connecting with that audience at the right time with the right message and the right platform. So whether it's mobile, whether it's desktop, and then also it's managing up. That's another big problem that people have, is that they're doing all this work and it's contributing to the bottom line, but no one knows about it. So when you're thinking about all the different hats that you're wearing, you want to make sure that you're focusing your time, energy, and resources in the right places that are actually going to move the bottom line. So just real briefly, since it seems like you guys understand search engine optimization to a degree, but what it is, it's the process, obviously, of optimizing all your assets to make sure you're found in natural search. And this could be on YouTube as well as Google, Bing, other platforms. And why it's important is because pretty much any digital asset can be a marketing touch point. So when you think again about your social, your content, your video, your images, all of these are marketing touch points, because where are people searching and how are they searching? And it's really understanding that. And who's responsible? Everyone. And this is where I talk to people from the leadership team on down. Everyone's responsible when you think about all the information that you have out there, all of the different messages you're putting out there, what's happening in marketing, what's happening in coming up with these ideas for campaigns, but also the technology. So one of the challenges too can also be the back-end technology and making sure that it's working with you and for you when you're creating this content and optimizing this content so it's all connected. And so part of it, I find, when you're doing search engine optimization is an education and training, so that people know when to pull you in, so you're part of that overall conversation from the very beginning. So it's not that you put information out there and all of a sudden nothing's happening, right? So it's basically making sure you're part of that. But what's in a successful SEO program is these 4 pillars, and I'll get into each one of these because the reality is this is ongoing. This isn't part of one campaign and it's done. You have to keep continuing to plan, optimize, measure, and communicate. And the reason why this is important is because the search engines are changing. Part of you guys have probably heard about all the different changes they've made to the algorithms. And this is in part to fight spam, but it's also in part to make sure they're delivering the best information to their users to keep those people coming back. But then your competitors are also changing. They're adding new content. They're also optimizing their content, so that can have an impact on your program. You're changing your content. You're adding content, you're optimizing it, that can impact it, positive and negative, but also the user behavior is changing. We talked about how many searches are happening in Google a day, but Google has also said that they've seen 16% of those searches are brand new to them every single day. That's not a small amount, and so it's important to keep up on understanding not just the search part, but also how are they searching on mobile versus how are they searching on the desktop, because that could be pretty different when people are on the go different times a day. And that's where it's important to understand your audience. What questions do they have? What do they really want to know? What can you as a nonprofit NGO tell them that would be important to them? What resonates with them? Who's your competition? What are they doing across mobile and desktop? These are all important things because, everyone would like to be number one, at least, on page 1 for the popular head terms that also, by the way, have high competition. So you have to be realistic with what is possible, what is achievable, because you might want to look into some of these other areas that have less competition, but also high volume. So how can you beat out your competitors based on what people really want and need? But even the low competition and low volume, that's important too, because when you start to get into that long tail, yes, it's a lot of content. Yes, it's not as much volume, but when you add it all together, not only does it drive, qualified traffic, you can also break through that noise and that clutter that you may never get to number 1 in that high competition and high volume. And it's about being honest. So, we talked about these one-pagers. And on the sheet that I included, there's some tools that I've listed out. So make sure that you're doing that keyword research, even though search has really evolved into more intent-based searches versus keyword-specific researches. But you really want to understand the beginning, because what you think people want may not be what people want. So it really is about managing your time and focusing on those right areas without, getting into trouble and wasting a lot of time. And then also look at the competition and then use some of these tools to look at your overall site health. Because some of the challenges are that from a technical standpoint, you may be doing yourself a disservice. And so coming up with those ways to break through that, is very important. So some of the things you can control today, and I like this, even though this is St. Jude's Hospital, yes, but you don't have to be a big nonprofit or a big NGO to own this page. And so it's really smart if you guys, is anyone using Google Grants now? So really look into, if you're not, Google Grants, because you can get up to $10,000 a month in paid search to manage this campaign. So you can own some of this space, but also for your own website, making sure you're using these site links. And one of the things I like about this example with St. Jude's is how they're really engaging users in different ways with, you could go to the donations, you can learn more about them, you can also do their careers, like do you want to volunteer? It's about some of their events. And so they really give you multiple options. They're not trying to direct you down one path that they think you should go down, right? And they're also providing you other information around their Wikipedia, their social, so now you can have that personality around them, their Facebook, their YouTube channel. They also have a great page for their yearly events. So this is where you can own that brand, and it's great for multiple reasons because not just what I already spoke about, but sometimes, let's face it, bad things can happen. And you want to make sure that you're telling your story and that people can know more about you, so it's not just covered by, in some cases, negative news, which we've all seen happen from time to time. And then you have your editorial calendar. This is a great way to create and optimize content for yearly events because we talked about Giving Tuesday. We all know that happens. We also know, December, there's a lot of donations because people are in the giving season, and let's face it, they want a tax write-off. But we all have these yearly events, whether we're having a fun run or a fundraiser or something that you can then create that content year after year that then can be found by these users. And then also look for new content opportunities. Google Trends, I think, is an amazing tool. It's free. You can start to see how people are searching. I gave this example around Ebola. Because personally, I never really thought much about it or knew much about it until last summer when all of a sudden it's a hot topic, it's everyone in the news, and then I wanted to understand what it was. And so even you can see here with Ebola charity and Ebola donation, how it wasn't just like a spike and it's gone. This is something, if that's where you're at and that's important to you as an organization, you can see that there's a trend and that maybe you want to start looking into what do people want to know? What's important to them? What questions can I answer for them and start to create that content? So it's not just about, again, yourself, but what do people really want to know? And then some of the tactics that are really important because with SEO, you hear a lot about the algorithms and here's the new hottest thing, but you can't boil the ocean. You cannot focus on all of this different content and all of these different tips and tricks and so forth. But these are some of the mainstays that quite frankly have been around for at least 5 or more years, in some cases 20 years for search engine optimization. One is URLs. And this, yes?
Are you,
Hmm?
in case I can't write fast enough,
Sure.
can we get a copy of your 12 search?
I-
Is that possible?
I mean, if anyone wants it, if I don't know if they're distributing it, but I can email it for sure.
Okay,
But I'll try to go slow. So the SEO friendly URLs, this is really about using some of the keywords. So when you think about search engine optimization, think about it, it's a keyword theme. When you think about humans versus machines, right? As a human, I can watch a video. As a human, I can look at an image. As a human, I can see that maybe it's 1, 2, 3, question mark, 4, 5, 6. And I can figure it out for myself. But as a machine, they only know what you give it. And so this is where it becomes important to create that theme. So Google and Bing and the rest of the engines are looking to serve up that best content, but they're also looking for what do we think versus what's this person searching for versus what you have to offer, and we're going to then rank it in some of the things you can control, and I'll talk about some of the things you can't control that are important that you can use some of your social, some of your PR, some of your partners to help you with as well. But SEO-friendly URLs, if you do have these ones that don't make any sense, talk to your tech team, talk to your internal team that controls this, or even some of the writing partners to see if they can start to use more keyword-rich URLs. If it's part of your content management system problem, you can use something called a mod rewrite that can typically write over that code so that it does come off as more keyword-rich versus something that doesn't make sense. Title tags, I'm sure a lot of you have heard about them. This is how it looks in the search engine, but it's something that's within your control, within your code. This is the most important thing that you can control in organic search. And the reason why is because it essentially titles the page and titles your content and says, this is what this is about. And so they go, aha. So I'm looking at this title. Now I'm going to scan the rest of the page to see, is there a theme that I can then relate on, which is why it's important to include it in that, and then multimedia. So when you think about video and images, you got to think about how you're naming this stuff. So when you think about naming that video, the description of the video, the image file names, image alt text, some of these very tactical things make such a big difference in the strategic world of capturing that audience. Again, tying back to understanding it. And with multimedia, you can even think about things like, putting out the transcript for the video, because that's an easy way to have all that keyword-rich text, but also for the user itself, they can watch the video. They don't have to read the text. Some people do. My dad's one of them. He hates online video. But my dad aside, it's good for search. And then inbound links. This is something you can't necessarily control. Inbound links are essentially links pointing to your site. And this is something that, to put it easy, the search engines look at it as a vote for your site. And they're looking for the quality versus the quantity. So say you are a charity that feeds children that need it, and you work with schools. A school then links off to your site. One, it's a .edu, which is, weighs more than a .com. And that is also relevant when you talk about school and then feeding children. So that's a good way to look at it. But what you really want is to show these engines that, hey, this content or this site is important enough, and that's why we're linking back. And they weigh that in their algorithm saying, oh, this is important content, we want to raise that up. And then keyword targeting, as I talked about, the whole thing's a keyword theme. If you're using a keyword once, they go, okay, yeah, you got it included. We'll put you on page 10 because this is a highly competitive area, and great, you're there. But that doesn't really help you because, let's face it, you lose over 50% of the traffic after page 1 to begin with, which is why everyone wants to be number 1 on page 1. But you can't always do that. But making sure you're using that phrase in your target at least 3 times so that you can show, like, this is really what I'm about, and then also including in your header tags, H1 being the an important tag because that helps head up that particular section. Related terms, an H2. So say you're doing like coat donations, you may have an H1 that's donate coats, and then maybe go into H2s of kids coats, adult coats, whatever that might be. So you get the picture. Site load time. This, I think, is incredibly important. This is something that came out only a couple years ago, and Google has gone on record basically saying any site that takes longer than 2 seconds to load, we kind of have a problem with, and we could penalize it, meaning that you're going to have a problem ranking. So you can use, this is pingdom.com. It's a free tool. I actually included it on the list of tools to look at. But you can use that to get an idea, and then if you have a heavy site load time, look to see if there's a way to compress those files, or maybe break the pages up that are trying to be too many things. Title tag modifiers, I love this. And the reason why I love this is when we go back to that high competition areas that have high volume, this is a way for you to stand out. So, I particularly wanted to donate coats in the fall. I went to my closet, and I've lived all over the place. I lived in Chicago, which obviously extremely cold. And then here it's not as much, even though it is cold, but coats I hadn't worn. And I'm like, why do I have all these coats? So I was like, I want to donate some coats. So I donate coats. And I'm like, wait, now I'm all over the place. I have all these different options. I want to be able to drive someplace. So I started to do donate coats in DC 2014. And that's how I found, the place that I took it. It was one warm coat was where I went to. But this is a way to break through some of that clutter by getting more location-specific, date-specific, and it doesn't have to be for donations. It could be a yearly event that you can hold year after year, posting pictures, etc. Again, ways to engage people in interesting ways. Social sharing, we talked about social, and social has become more important to search, particularly organic search. We all know that they kind of intertwine and interact with each other. I mean, let's face it, I don't wake up in the morning and be like, I'm going to donate to a charity today. Be nice to think that people do, but I don't. It's usually something driving me, whether I get an email, whether I see something someone sharing online, it's television, something. But that aside, social signals actually impact organic search. So the search engines are actually looking for, how are people engaging with you online? Do they care? Are they retweeting? Are they linking back to you? All these different things. And personally, my personal opinion based on what I'm seeing and how social's like starting to edge up more, and when you look at the Gen Zs and I'd say millennials and how they're using social, and they're using social for good, I think that's going to become incredibly important for organic search, and especially with all the personalization. And then consider long content. Another way to cut through that clutter with highly competitive areas. And this is where you start to get into, maybe a 1,500 word page, but this was something I flagged here. And the reason why is because you want to use your data to make sure it makes sense for you to do that. So it could be a case study. It could be maybe you have a particular story to tell, something that's longer form. But I think we've all probably been to about.com. When I see in the results, it usually ranks high. I don't even click on it anymore because usually it's so much text and I'm like, I can't even find what I'm looking for. You don't want to have that situation. So use your data to make sure you're doing the right thing and not doing it just to target a keyword, because bounce rate is another signal. So when Google and Bing see someone doing a search, they get to it and they immediately come back, or they come back soon. They're like, maybe this isn't good content. Maybe this isn't right for our users. So we're going to penalize it. We're going to maybe push it down a little bit because it doesn't seem like the right fit. So this all goes together. And then the long tail. I talked about this before, looking at expanding some of that content, getting into whether it's the modifiers, whether it's more specifics, looking at that search data to make sure you're answering people's questions based on what they're interested in, using that keyword data and expanding on the content. And one of the things I think is great about the long tail, do most of you guys have site search on your website? I would assume. Use that. Look to see what people are typing in once they get to your website, and see if there's any sort of trends in there. Is there something that you can engage with them more, build upon? Because I think that's a great source of data that's very specific to you versus the general data. And then analytics. So this is something that, it ties in a bit more, like pulling in your own monthly data, which is incredibly important because I talked about in the beginning, not only are you changing, your competition's changing, the search engines are changing, people are changing how they search, platforms are changing. Mobile has come on. It used to be maybe 10% of people were using their mobile. Now usually it's over 50% of people are using mobile to do even donations, much less search for information or anything else. So making sure that you're understanding your audience, what they're doing. And then, are you guys using Google Webmaster Tools or Bing Webmaster Tools? How many of you guys are using it now? Do this now. Honestly, if you're not the one controlling this, have whoever's controlling this do this now. This is incredibly valuable data. And the reason why it's incredibly valuable, it's not only showing you what people are searching for and coming to your website to get to you, like what type of keywords and phrases that you can then build upon. You can also look at some of the things that they're doing on mobile as well as your website from a technical standpoint. So do you have any roadblocks? Because you may have heard, Google got really serious about mobile in April, where they basically started penalizing sites that don't have responsive design or some sort of mobile-friendly site. And that's not going to end. I'm sure Bing's going to roll out with that sometime soon. But just, again, the role of mobile, they want to make sure they're delivering the best experiences. So see if there's any red flags within there, because it'll flag it, like what you're doing well, what could use some attention, and then what's a problem. Then use your analytics, whether you're using Google Analytics or some other package, to then back it up to make sure you're focusing your time and energy on the right thing. And then other things you can use are Moz Analytics and Raven. And the reason why I like them is because you can not only look at you, but your competition as far as what they're doing. And it's a way to call out to say, if they're doing better than you, why? What can you learn from them? Maybe not completely rip them off, but what can you learn from them that then you can then use on your site to improve upon some of these areas? And then pulling together reports, like what's important to you? What are your high value tasks? Your key performance indicators, what is important? Is it video views? I'm sure it's donations and probably volunteering in some degree, but making sure you're pulling that information together month over month to see those trends. Are you going in the right direction? If not, why not? And then, dig in a bit more, because this is a lot of work, but it's worth it. I mean, the number 2 thing people do on the web is search. The number 1 thing is email, but the number 2 thing is search. So this is not something that you can just be like, I don't care. I'm focused on something else. And then honestly, this is another thing that I see people miss out on. It's like they're doing all the work. It's contributing to the bottom line. It's awesome stuff. You're getting volunteers. You're getting donations. You're building up this content, but you're not talking about it. Nobody knows. They're just like, oh yeah, whatever, things are thriving. I think it's the television. It's being as direct mail. We're not sure. And it's not just about search as its silo, because search, social, email, direct mail, all these things are working together, but you want to be able to call it out. So lay out a plan for how you're working with the day-to-day contacts, whether it's what you need help on or what you need to teach them to do to help you with your program, how you talk to middle management, executive management, and most importantly, how are you reporting out? Quarterly business reviews in general. Whether you call it a business review or just a review, go through with marketing. Talk about all the cool stuff that you're doing and how it's contributing, impacting to the bottom line. Because one of the things that I hear a lot is lack of resources, lack of support, maybe lack of tools. If you can show them that this is impacting the bottom line, why wouldn't you get investment? Why wouldn't you get investment in people helping you out or helping you with get some tools? And a lot of these tools, by the way, are free. Most of them actually are free, but they do have deeper analytics that you may need a little financial support. But then also look at your competition. Nothing gets an organization more angry than when they see their competition killing them. And we used to have the thing that's called pride and envy, where we talk about what are we proud of that we've done, what did we accomplish, what did it do, but who are we envious of? I'm sure everyone's seen a campaign out there that they're envious of, whether it's an ice bucket challenge or whether it's something else. But what do you envy and what can you do to try to get to that? And then bring in vendors. You don't have to be a big organization to bring in Google. It doesn't have to be Google. It could be a small emerging technology. It could be someone who works specifically with nonprofits. It could be an analytics provider. Help educate the leadership team on what it is you're doing, and then come out with POVs. As mobile's changing, as social's changing, as search is changing, what's your point of view on how that will impact, and then what do you think that you need to get in front of and need to get ahead of it? So that's it. So thank you for your time.
Thanks. My name's Andy Marshall from the One Campaign. I'm going to talk about email. I think we've heard from the 2 exciting areas. Email is the older, slightly dull uncle at the wedding. In fact, at the beginning when we asked you about which channels you were using, we didn't even mention email. So I'm going to ask the question, which of you are using email? Is there anybody out there that does not use email? No. So I've really got probably nothing that I can tell you today. Email is the older, slightly boring uncle at the wedding, but it's going through some changes. It's going through some sort of midlife crisis at the moment. So I think it's worth talking about email. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about how it got that status, a little bit about perhaps crisis is a strong word, but some of the changes that email is going through and some of the things you can do about that. And I guess if I could summarize it in two phrases, the first would be quality over quantity, and the second would be to think about email in the context of all of the other things that you're doing, very much going back to things we've already heard this morning. So email has very rapidly evolved over 2 decades, I would say, into the most cost-effective, useful form of campaigning and fundraising that we have. It's fast, it's cheap, it's measurable, it's targetable. Email is, in many respects, awesome. We've seen over the last 2 decades the rise of organizations that are really almost purely built around email, organizations like Avaz that are digital natives, and we've seen the rise of campaigning platforms like change.org, where you can run amazing campaigns and build your list. We've seen the growth of many, many email management platforms, services to match your list to address, demographic data. I'm not going to go into those in detail, but there is a huge armory of weapons that you can use there to improve your email performance. Many of you are using those every day. Email has become both an art and a science. An art because we think very carefully about how we turn those things out, how we write them, how we phrase them, the images that we use if we use images, the ways that we address them. And also a science as we focus on the numbers of people that are opening them, the numbers of people that are clicking through, the reasons for that. We can obsess over that for days and weeks, and many of you in the audience, I'm sure, are familiar with that agony and also the ecstasy of an amazing email that works incredibly well. Email isn't perfect as a communications tool. We all know that. One communications firm I saw estimates that as many as 1 in every 6 email messages never reaches the subscriber's inbox. Most of us are familiar with the issues around deliverability, around actually getting the thing to the person you want to get it to. And many people hate email. Many of us spend a lot of our days trying to combat email. I went away on vacation last week. Before I went, I got it down to 0. It was a very, very satisfying feeling. And then I come back on Monday, and there they all are again. And let's face it, even those of us that love email as a communications tool, we don't look at that and say, wow, amazing. 500 incredible emails for me to look at. I'm going to look at each of those really carefully and read them. We just go through and we try and process them. Email, the good and the bad thing about email is it's ubiquitous. The statistics vary, but there are around 200 billion emails sent a day. 90% of all US consumers engage with email on a daily basis. There are around 4 billion email accounts around the world. There'll be 5 by 2017. The scale of it, the sheer scale of it, is the great thing about it because it's ubiquitous, but it's also the bad thing about it. It's never ending. We all know as consumers of email that fighting the battle against your inbox, finding tools to filter out the bad stuff, focus on the good stuff, is a constant part of daily business life. So that is the battle that we are chasing as producers as well as consumers of email. Get noticed, get taken account of, get acted on. And it's tough, and it's increasingly tough. And here comes the but. Email is going through midlife crisis, changes, crisis. Some people would say I think that's much too strong. It's changing its status in the context of communications overall. One of the symptoms for that is that while the number of business emails is growing, the number of consumer emails is actually declining. There are a number of reasons for that, but one primary reason for that is demographic, which is that if you look at the use of email on a demographic basis, we know that younger people do not think that email is cool. And the reason for that is that email is not cool. And so, those of you with kids or those of you who are younger will know that you spend your time glued increasingly to Snapchat or to messaging or to texting or to something else. And email is not something that is the focus of your attention. Snapchat is cool. Email is not cool. And that's a big challenge for those of us for whom email is the primary means of communication. Those of you, has anybody here experimented with using Snapchat? It's tough. It's a great tool. It's wonderful. Everyone thinks it's cool. But I'm going to ask the guy at the back there, how useful is it as a fundraising or advocacy tool?
Not useful at all.
Right. It's really tough. It's something we have to be there because people are using it, and we have to be where people are. But it's really tough. The fact that people are using it, I think, is we're using it and it's fun. But what are we going to do with it? I have no idea. It's really tough. It's a fascinating set of experiments. The other thing that's changing on email is mobile. So well over half of all emails are now opened on mobile devices. And that has a number of consequences. The open rates and click-through rates are a bit disputed, but it does look as if email open rates and click-through rates on mobile are lower than they are on a laptop. And it also is very clear that people react differently depending upon what they're clicking through on. So how many of you read email on your way into work on the bus or the train? Right. If you click through on a link in an email and if it goes to a page that's not optimized for mobile, you're not going to look at it, right? We've all done that. You click through, you can't quite read what's there, it's not responsive, you just get out of it. So that's a very basic thing that we're all going to have to deal with. Mobile is king, and that's something that we've talked about a little bit, and I suspect we'll talk about more. And again, that's also partly a demographic issue. Another thing is that from an advocacy point of view, and most of what we at One do, in fact all of what we at One do, is around email as an advocacy tool, it's really not, it's not where the cool kids are at the moment. The Ice Bucket Challenge, the hashtag activism around the abducted women in Nigeria, that was on social media. You can do amazing, awesome things on social media, and email, again, it's the boring uncle at the wedding who's maybe going to dance a little bit later and be slightly embarrassing. It's not cool. The Ice Bucket Challenge, you can certainly promote it using email. You can certainly you can communicate all sorts of exciting things on email, but it's not like Facebook. It's not like Snapchat. It's not like Twitter. You can't do the same cool things. So we're having to compete with that in many respects. Just to sum up some of the issues with this, some of you will know the digital consulting group M&R that produces a set of benchmarks every year, and this is a quote from their most recent report. Overall, email list growth is increasing, but growth is slowing, and online revenue from email is down. Email is not as awesome as it used to be. Now just pause for a moment and think what would happen if email were to be taken away from us, and what that would do to our organisations. So that in the longer term, even if in the short term email is working fine for everybody, we're going to have to deal with that. We're going to have to start thinking about how we work with email in slightly different ways in the future. So here are a few things, some of which have already been discussed. So test and optimize. How many of you test your emails before they go out? Testing is critical. You don't need to be huge to test. Take small samples. Think about everything from the who it's coming from, through the subject line, through the wording of it, through the length of the email, through what it's pointing to, everything about it. See that if you can improve the performance of it. It's always worth testing and optimizing just a little bit more. Be selective with your lists. Segment your list. If you're starting to see the response rates to emails go down, think about what parts of your list you're sending to. Think about them demographically if you can. Think about them geographically if you can. Think about them in terms of by organisation if that's useful for you. But I think one of the temptations with email, because it's so quick and easy, is the blast email, spray and pray. And that's one of the reasons why email has gradually become less and less effective. People are getting more than they want. They're not getting things that they think are appropriate for them. Think about when you go through your email on the bus or the train into work, and there's that great email from that great media company, and yeah, you did ask to be on their list. You did ask them to send you a summary every day or every week or every month of what they're doing. But it's 8:45 and you're a little bit late for work and it goes. So think about making your emails more appropriate for your audience, but also think about segmenting and selecting the audience. Good design. We heard about the virtues of Photoshop and the importance of design. I'm a word person. I come from originally print journalism, but I'd say 60% of what I think about these days is around design and visual appearance, because it's so critical to getting noticed first thing in the morning. It's so critical when somebody is going to be taking a look at that email, and I haven't got the number in my head, but it's for fractions of a second. So things that will help get you noticed, things that will help your audience, and every audience is different, to be noticed, to be understood, are critical. Work across platforms, and that's a common theme that we've heard this morning. Social media, email, web, they're all working together. In organisations that are really making this work, they're pulling in the same direction, they're directing to each other, there's a smooth journey between them, and that's absolutely critical. It's hard, but it's really important to think about it. Integrating online and offline. A lot of what we have done over the last year has been trying to find ways of taking the online offline and bringing the offline online. So that means something as simple as directing people to a local event using email and social, holding a fun event where people are perhaps taking pictures. We've had a campaign built around what we call the Strengthy, which is a form of selfie this year, and then getting them to post them online and then sharing with people that they're doing that. Hey, here are real people doing real things. Making that work together across platforms can be as simple as that. And it's really great, and it's very motivating for the people that are involved in the activities, and it means the audience is going to take it that bit more seriously. Thinking beyond the petition, a lot of what we do, and some of you probably do as well, is built around online petitions, which are very, very easy to do nowadays. They're very effective in some respects because you can quickly build an audience around a proposition, around a campaign. But at the same time, I think that people are starting to get a bit inured to them. They're starting to lose interest in them. So we have to think about other kinds of actions, whether those are Twitter actions or offline actions, thinking a little bit harder about how we use email to direct people towards actions. And you can see that trend in many organisations. The Ice Bucket Challenge, which I'm sure will come up, was a good example of that. Lastly, and I think this is really important for all of what we're talking about, think about the user and think about the user journey. Think about who they are when they're reading them on the train, on the bus. Think about them seeing them in their email inbox. Think about what that email inbox looks like. Think how many characters they're going to be reading. Think what information they see and what cues they will pick up from that. Think about what they click on. When they click on it, is it going to go through to a page that looks great on a phone screen? And is it going to give them enough information quickly and easily to enable them to say, hey, that's interesting, I want to know more about that. Think about who they are, think about their lives. I think that's good communications practice, frankly, for anything. There's one other point I'm going to leave you with about email, which is that it's certainly not going away. It's growing, it continues to grow, even if people take it maybe a little bit less seriously than they did 10 years ago, even if it is a bit dull. It's still there. It's still going to be the main pivot for most of us for campaigning for, I would say, decades to come. And I'm going to end by quoting one recent report. In an increasingly digitally led marketing landscape, the email address is now the centerpiece of any marketing activity. In fact, it is fast becoming the glue that binds all cross-channel activity together. Thank you.
So I suggested they knew a thing or two about their subject matter, but as you can see, incredible depth. And so please take full advantage. Ask any question you have. I'm sure you're all working in one way or another and trying to optimize what you do online. I'm going to take the moderator's prerogative of asking the first question to each of you, and it's one that would come up at some point anyway. Metrics. And Melanie, you touched on it. And every organization is going to have a CEO or a CFO or someone who has budget responsibility who's saying, okay, we're spending these dollars. I'm spending these dollars on social, on SEO, on email, and what's the return? What are the metrics? What are the KPIs? Some of those things, depending on the different platforms, are more clear than other platforms. So one at a time, if you would take what is important in terms of identifying metrics and communicating them in a way so that your managers or management understand the value of these activities.
I'll go first. Well, I think what I can speak to is just my own personal experience, and I kind of operate like a small one-person NGO, right? So what I really look at is I live and breathe by my WordPress statistics. I just look at it every day. I see what people are searching for. If all of a sudden an article comes up and it's showing that people are landing on my blog from something I wrote 2 years ago, that tells me, wait, there's something going on. People are talking about this again. I remember Google came out with some new data that people started donating online and doing shopping for the year-end season in August. But NGOs were gearing up and they were ready in November. And I noticed that in my own blog that people were landing on Nonprofit Tech for Good for charity gifts for holidays in August and September. So I live and breathe by my analytics and WordPress. Also email. Email and my website are the two most important things. I don't track how many retweets I get. I'm just like, if I'm getting retweets, I'm having a good day, right? If this thing went well and it got shared on Facebook, great. If it didn't, it's just another day. I'll try something different 2 days from now. So I'm pretty simple about analytics and data. For me, it's still old school. It's 90s, it's early 2000s. The two most important tools for me are my blog and my email newsletter. And I've got about 1 million followers online, but my 60,000 email newsletter subscribers trump them every single time. So thinking about just tracking, those are the two things I live by. Sometimes I hear people put together reports and they're like, we got 15 likes yesterday, and they're actually sending this around, or monthly reports of how many retweets they got. And I just think that's a little insane, right? Particularly if you're a small NGO. In terms of reporting, this is something that I talk about a lot, which is I notice this dynamic, and even in this room, most people look to me to be under the age of 30, right? So it's a younger group, and there's this dynamic that's going on right now with millennials, and I do have to say Gen Xers can be pretty cool too, right? But there's this dynamic going on between millennials, half the Gen Xers, and then half the Gen Xers and baby boomers, where they don't understand each other, right? And so if you're having this battle where I need a graphic designer, or I need you to give me a raise, or I need some kind of budget for social media, you have to put it in a report. What she was saying, send something around every 3 months. This is how much traffic we're getting, right? We did this email on this Monday and our traffic soared this much, right? Prove to people that your social media campaigns are actually producing results. If not, you're just going to be fighting a losing battle. I find that executive staff, they need proof. So that would be my advice.
And I would add on to what Heather's saying, because one of the things when you talk about likes and retweets, you know, I hear about click-through rates. We got such a high click-through rate, but then you look at what actually happens, and you got 75% bounce rate because maybe you're positioning it wrong. So it's really important to continue the conversation. Like, yes, you got a high click-through rate, or even if you got like a maybe not so great click-through rate, but it's a really highly engaged audience. And not just that they're coming to the website and you're bringing in traffic, but what's that traffic doing? You know, what's that time on site? Well, how many pages are they consuming? Are they watching videos? Are they donating? Are they volunteering? Are they doing these things that you want them to do? Are they signing up? Are they going to the yearly event? And that's where, you know, it's not really easy to talk about these are the things you need to track, because I think it's really organization specific. You really need to define what's important for you, and that can change depend on where your focus is. It could be focused on that yearly event. It could be focused on end of the year donations. It could be focused on, you know, hey, we want to get volunteers for something else. Whatever that is, make sure that you define it beforehand, because that's going to be the important part to determining what success is. So just, you know, get in a room. What's success look like? Because it's not a high click-through rate. It's not a bunch of retweets. It's not, you know, an open rate that's a great if they're bouncing out and they're not doing what you want them to do. So that's my 2 cents.
Brian, I can only assume you asked that question because you've been reading my email.
Of course.
We have a new head of marketing who is terrific, and but has asked for us to redesign the metrics that we provide to her. The old head of marketing really wanted to look at 2 or 3 metrics a month. 1 would probably have done him. Our new head of marketing, she wants to look at an awful lot of data while she makes decisions, and that's terrific. But I would go back to focus. Focus is absolutely critical. 3 things. Focus, because you can only look at a few of these, or you will go insane. If you are going to spend every day looking at your Facebook post reach and your click-through rate and your deliverability and all the rest of it, you will go insane.
Yeah, we call it analysis paralysis.
Right. So that's the second thing. Second thing is consistency. Trying to be relatively consistent. It's great to take 1 or 2 metrics and track them over a period of time, see what they're doing month on month, year on year, and just think about that over the course of several months, rather than dotting from one to the other. And then the third one is, if you're looking at metrics and you're not doing anything as a result of that, there's a question about why you're looking at them. If a figure goes up or down, what does that mean? Are you going to actually change the behavior that you have? Are you going to re-engineer something? If you've looked at a metric for the course of a year and you haven't taken a decision based on it, then it might not be the right metric.
And I just one quick add-on to that is I would agree, because you have to also see what that time of year people are coming, because you're tracking month over month, so you may see traffic spike in one month. I actually worked for a company who wanted to fire their marketing team because they thought they weren't doing a good job, but the reality was is they had an event the month before, so the traffic leading up to that event caused it to spike, and then the next month the event's over, so it comes back down. And so it's really helping people understand and focusing your time, because not just the event specific, but even changes. I know specifically, I can speak for search, like sometimes the algorithm gets tweaked. I mean, Google, quite frankly, tweaks it a couple hundred times a year. Sometimes there's big changes, sometimes there's small changes, but you don't want to go chasing that like, oh, we dropped, oh, the traffic's down. Really understand what that means. Is it a minor thing, or do you need to take an action? So look at the analytics for sure on that.
Great. Okay, we've done very well. 25 minutes, here we come.
Thank you so much. That was fascinating. I have to confess, I'm not a communications person. I'm actually a program person sneaking in here to learn. But I'm curious if the most effective strategies, whether on social media or email or the website, involve sort of engaging and asking people to do something, like donate or call Congress or do something like that? Or can they also involve sort of educating and engaging people through better knowledge of the issues that your organization is working on? I'm asking because in our organization we do work both on the ground in different countries around the world, human rights work, and then we also do advocacy and mobilization work. We actually work with M&R. And so there's often a little bit of a trade-off and tension between folks who want to provide greater clarity on our programmatic accomplishments on the ground versus those who want to sort of mobilize and campaign around particular policy agendas. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on which is more effective, or if you could do both equally.
I'll go that one. You know, I think that's a really great, I don't even know if it's a problem, but it's a great condition to have, because what we're really starting to see is after 20 years of emails going, donate to us or sign our online petition, there's a lot of this fatigue or people not knowing how to use social media. So going on Twitter going, did you know we're also on Facebook? Or did you know that you can donate to us? There's this fatigue of this asking all the time. So what we're finding now and how all of this is evolving is program staff and program work, what communicators are calling it, is storytelling. But the two work together perfectly, right? So if you could get into a system where your program staff, maybe once a quarter, you know, in different regions, they submit maybe an 800-word story, they tell their story, and then the communication staff integrates that into their email and into their Twitter campaigns. One thing I really tell NGOs a lot is to resist that urge to do fundraising and marketing on social media. Go on there and you send out a tweet and it just tells a good story of your program work. That's good enough. So email, you used to tell your story through an email once a week. Now you're telling your story through 5 Facebook status updates once a week, 4 tweets a day. So having this content and having program staff that actually want to tell that story, 10 years ago, that was a battle, right? And we've been having that battle for a long time. But where all of this has evolved is the two work really well together. But it requires a communications director or a new media manager that's really organized and good at saying, okay, you person, you know, in Botswana right now, I need your article within 60 days. It's 30 days away. It's 15 days away. And then an editing process, and then turning it around and getting the photo and then putting it on the blog and then talking to the email person going, this is going in email. So if you can work out that system, that is an excellent problem to have, right? The storytelling mixed with the fundraising and the advocacy work.
And I would say, I think it goes back to some of the data too. So really understanding what people are doing on your website, what questions they might have, using some of the outside analytics. So again, there's some free tools that are out there that you could see what are some of those trends. And you can type in not just, you know, donate or something that's specific to your charity, but really start to ask longer tail questions. Is there any volume? Is there any interest out there? Because I can tell you, I'll give you an example for a group that I donate to. It's called the Gentle Barn. And the reason why I donate to them, they work with animals and they get all these animals from all these, whether they rescue them or people drop them off. But they also work with children. So they bring in these disadvantaged children that might have this hard upbringing, that they're in different, maybe reform schools or something, but they show these animals that were abused and how they've pulled them out and now they trust, and you know, they're hugging these cows and they're petting these chickens. I'm like, oh my God, it's beautiful. And these kids come in and they're angry and everything else, but they show them like, hey, these animals came from your background. Look at them now, how loving they are, and cuddle up to them, and it just changes the children. So when I got that email after reading all these stories and really connecting with them, and they're like, we need, hey, donate. donate? I'm like, yes, I will. You know, because it was building that relationship. And quite frankly, that's one of the beautiful things I think about the nonprofit world is you have so many wonderful stories to tell of how you're changing the world and really making a difference. And it's whether it's through video, whether it's through content, whether it's through images and social, that, you know, in the nerdy search world, you know, text, yeah, that's great, but who connects with words? Like just text, you know, you have those other emotional elements to tell that story. And it's really taking that data at the root of it, understanding what do people care about, what questions do they have, how do you connect with them, and building on that.
Yeah, I'm just going to continue the theme, but just to sharpen on a couple of those points, it's about telling those stories in the right way. So people aren't necessarily interested in programs or policy in and of themselves, but they are interested in the people and the stories around that, or the animals, to come to your point. It's about finding ways to communicate those things that really connect with people. So for us, for example, the Ebola crisis last year, a lot of that was about telling stories about the people, the frontline health workers that were working on those issues. And it was about finding sensitive ways to tell the stories of people that were affected and to use images. It was something that was actually very tough to do for us and many of the organisations, to maintain people's dignity, to maintain the view that the frontline health workers were the point of this. It's very tough to tell people's stories when, in many cases, they were covered in protective suits. So that's not always straightforward. If you're dealing with something like fistula, for example, that's a tough story to tell. Hard to think about that it's important to think about that in people terms. Images are critical. So are maps and charts. For our organisation, we sometimes joke that maps are our kittens. People love maps and charts.
We are going to get to all of your questions. We have 20 minutes.
Hi, my name is Alan Williams. I'm a founder and president of CAMAID. I have two quick questions. One, you mentioned about email is measurable. I need you to expound on that. How's that possible? And second, how do you put all the social medias together that will connect with email, where you get new people who will want to visit you, but they'll start to get more familiar with you, and then they're going to be more want to get engaged, and then get to a point where they want to donate. So, because what I found out when I just finally got connected with Twitter after I've been resisting for all these years, but I finally because I know it's so important. But then they extrapolate all the names from my emails and Facebook, and they put them all together. So now I'm trying to get to a point where I'm trying to get people to be a little bit more familiar and more engaging and trust, to trust our website, and then they can, donate. Thank you. I really enjoyed the platform, by the way.
Okay, 3 very quick answers. On how can you measure it, there's a variety of technical platforms. You and I can talk afterwards, and I can refer you to people that know far more than I do about how to do that. There's some very straightforward technical answers to how you can measure what your list is, who's opening things, who's clicking through, and what the overall impact of an email is. The second thing about moving people between platforms is a really, really good point. There are lots of technical ways of doing that in terms of extrapolating, as you say, people's emails from their social presence or the other way around. But you can just tell people about those things. Let people know via Twitter that you have presence elsewhere. Let people know via email that you're available on social media. And I think the third point on that is, to go back to an earlier point that I made, is think about their experience of emails and think about their experience of your organisation. Think when they initially sign up, what are they signing up for? Are they signing up for a newsletter? Are they signing up for a donation? How do you respond to that? What email communication are they getting? Think about the user's journey from their point of view. Oh wow, I've just noticed these guys on Twitter. I'm going to click through and have a look at their site. Oh, there's a button there to get their newsletter. This is an issue I'm interested in. I'll click on that. Oh, I get a nice email from them saying, thanks very much, hope to get to know you better. Oh, I'm getting the first newsletter now. It's saying, welcome to, is it CAMAID? welcome to CAMAID, here are the things that we deal with. Think about that as a conversation, and think about them as people that are going through a journey with your organisation, and what are they experiencing, and how can you connect with them more directly? How can you gradually build up the engagement with them? But I'm going to pass over to my colleagues, because I think that they will have things to say about this as well.
You know, the only thing I'm thinking of is just a very little practical tip, which is kind of what I like to give as little tips. Does everybody have the little icons on their website and inside their email newsletter and their square? Right, you know what I'm talking about? We've been seeing them for a decade. Well, I looked at my blog traffic to see what people were clicking inside of my blog. And what I noticed was over the last year, people aren't clicking on them anymore. And I talked to my designer about that, and she said, oh, that doesn't surprise me. It's just noise now, right? So what I'm learning about social media is when everybody does the same thing, the online masses tune it out. So I sat down with my designer. Fortunately, she's fantastic. She does work for free for me, which is very rare. I don't expect designers to work for free. But she did, and we sat down and we created some new icons, right? They look different. They were branded to the blog. Probably that would cost $300 if you hired a designer. We put them back inside of, we replaced them with the old icons, and then I was getting 60, 70 clicks a day to Facebook. So I was getting new fans just by investing and thinking a little bit differently of like, yeah, everybody's using those icons, and I've been using those icons forever. Now I'm gonna talk to the designer and try something different, and that $300 investment over the last 6 months that we've had it has probably resulted in 5,000 new Facebook fans. I don't use Facebook advertising, but my guess is the same results would have cost $10,000. So understanding strategically how to cross-promote social media from email and from your website and investing again in graphic design can have a huge impact.
Hi, I just wanted to reflect upon the fact that at this conference we've talked a lot about partnerships between NGOs and the private sector. And there are a lot of companies, I work for UPS, and we have a thought leadership blog. It's called Longitudes. And Longitudes talks about big ideas. And so anything, when you are an expert in an area, you could be very valuable to a company that wants to talk about these issues and doesn't necessarily, we have a lot of resources. We don't necessarily have the expertise to talk about certain sustainability issues. Or maybe we want to talk about trade at UPS, but we want to talk about how trade can lift people out of poverty. And I encourage you to reach out to other companies and other NGOs to develop partnerships. You can do a Q&A between your CEO and their CEO, and it's a great way of leveraging each other's audiences.
Thank you very much.
Thanks. This is a fantastic panel, and you've given us just a wealth of information. As I said earlier, I work at Child Fund, where I'm the communications director. Interestingly, our social media, our website is not under me. It's under fundraising. And so one of the things that I struggle with is how to use traditional media in a compatible way with social media. So you made an interesting comment, Heather, I think it was Heather, one of you did, about you should be telling stories and not asking for money. One of my jobs is my staff writes all the content, but we don't necessarily decide on what content gets on. So I'm looking for that way to leverage traditional media with social media in a better, more integrated way. For instance, we did do a lot of work on Ebola too. We got a New York Times front page above the fold article. I don't know how many people read the New York Times off the top of my head. We also got a 5.5-minute piece on NBR with Ophabia Quist-Arcton. 13.2 million people do listen to Morning Edition. I do know that much now. So how do you take that when everybody's talking social media, all the resources in a lot of organizations are going into social media, but they're never going to get 13.2 million people to listen to the story. So, how do we integrate those two better?
It's a really good question. There's two questions. One is about organisation, and I'll talk about that very briefly, and then about the substance. Every organisation structures content, communications, marketing, developments, probably leaving out some departments, digital, creative, etc. differently. And I don't think there's a single organisation that doesn't have some set of issues or sub-issues there. And I don't think there's a right answer. And I think you just have to presume on the good nature of human beings, which can sometimes be a heroic assumption. In terms of making it work, I worked for a private sector company before this, and I remember we used to get quoted relatively often in mainstream media on subjects like Afghanistan and Iraq. And I remember we spent a long time tracking what was the impact of that on our digital platforms. And you would see a spike in people going to the website, and then we could show that that traffic was going to what were for us conversion places where they were then going to talk to a real person. And that was time consuming and arduous, and it's easier now than it was 5 years ago to track through leads. I think you can also do things like tweeting it out. You can do things like double screening if you're on TV or radio. We're on NPR now. Great to see the mentions of our Ebola work. You can make sure that people within the organisation are communicating that and aware of it, using their own social media or using email to let their own people know. You can, I'm sure you maintain lists or databases of your own influencers, friends and family, going out to them to maximise it, using those quotes in share graphics, for example, screenshots. There's a panoply of different techniques. I don't think there's a single right answer.
And this does take a little bit of time, and I'm probably not as diplomatic. I make a little bit more noise when it comes to the organization, because I've worked with organizations where offline and online, it was almost like the Hatfields and McCoys, but they didn't want to work together for whatever territorial reasons. And so there's one thing to try to work with the relationships to show, hey, we can help each other because we're promoting this. Look, people are looking for this information. We could put it online. All great things happen. And if that doesn't happen, one of the things to do, when I talked about whether it's a quarterly business review or whether it's something else, show some of the trends. Show some of the trends of user behavior. Like, this is what happens. We have all this great stuff that's happening offline that's getting all this promotion. And look, then people go to search. They look for this information. Maybe they go to our social page to see what is our voice, what's our point of view. They go to the website and just show just what that natural organic behavior is. And that's when the leadership says, are we doing it? Are you guys working together? Are we making sure that we're coordinating? And it kind of takes the burden off of you of trying to get things done that, for whatever reason, maybe either people are too busy or maybe it's territorial or something. So it's just something to think about. It does take a little bit of time, but I found that breaks down barriers because, as we heard as far as, the different things and how they work together, what the things you have to do is search as well as email, and with social, you need creative on board, you need editorial, you need technology, you need all these other folks on board. And let's face it, we're all busy with our own things that our boss and our boss's boss and boss's boss are telling us to do. And you just don't always have the time to be like, oh yeah, I'll help you out too. So it's really just, again, that mutual benefit of, hey, if we all work together, this is how we can have a big impact overall, because this is the way the audience is and this is what they want. And we got to give it to them, because in some cases, you have one shot. When you talk about the Ebola specific incident, there's more than one charity out there that is going to help and contribute and, do great things. So you have that one shot to get the interest if people are like, oh, I'm hearing about it a lot in the news. What can I do?
Right. Well, in my career, I've never actually had to pitch the media. That's never been something that's been in my job description. But a lot of people send me press releases. And the one thing that I always marvel on, and everything that's changed so much over the last 20 years, what is the one thing that has not changed? And that is a press release. And every time I get one, I'm just like, I can't believe this. Like a large foundation will send me one, and I'm like, is it 1999? Like, is there not some kind of creative process going on in this discussion? So I would think about doing press releases completely different.
Well,
And,
we don't do, I hardly do it all.
oh, okay. But that was just...
Reason. Nobody wants to read it.
Well, think about, so if I got a press release and the font was a little bit bigger, it included a set of infographics, it included a link to an online photo gallery, And then if I'm a journalist and that nonprofit's going out that day and they've picked 100 journalists on Twitter, so they start that day at 6 o'clock in the morning and they go out on Twitter and mention them and link to their press release, which is not just email but web-based, and then it's got a set of infographics, it has images you already use, a good compelling story. So when I hear the conversations about media, like how do we get our story to the media, when I see that first press release, and maybe one campaign does this because you guys are really good at social media outreach, but I've never actually seen it done. So I would really analyze this whole concept of how you approach the media, and even just as a blogger, I feel guilty. You know Craig Newmark of Craigslist? So I met him in the late 90s when I was really young, and he gave me a piece of advice. He said, respond to every email. And if you email Craig today, he will respond to every email. And it's been his kind of claim to fame. And now I just get all these press releases, and every time I feel so guilty, I just delete them. I don't respond, and I have guilt. I'm like, oh, I'm so sorry. I'm deleting you. But if somebody sent me something compelling, a press release with a picture and an infographic, I might actually be inspired to write about what they're talking about. Well, it would depend on the subject line, of course. But I would assume somebody would reach out to me today. The way to reach me is email or Twitter. Okay. Right? That's the way to reach me. And journalists, they love Twitter. Right? They love it.
Well, they want to retweet their own. I mean, they've got their own social media following.
Yeah.
Thinking about it. Yeah.
Right.
Every time you delete an email unread, a puppy dies.
Or is it a map dies?
Or it's a map.
Map dies?
I do feel guilt. I'm like, I'm sorry.
We've got 5 minutes and we have 2 questions left.
Hi there. I have a question about emails, because I think what I got from your presentation was that there's maybe simple ways that we can really improve the way we use emails, but I didn't really get many kind of quick tips from you. So I'm wondering, maybe you talked about a more appropriate email, and then you also talked about design and visual appearance of emails, but I'm wondering if you can just give maybe the top 5 things that you can improve about your emails within kind of your member base.
Okay, I'm just going to concentrate on the straightforward writing things. There are things to do with format and structure of an email. Who's it from? Is it a name? Is it a recognizable name? Is it a name that somebody feels they have some kind of a relationship with? We send out emails from the One campaign. We send out emails from individual staff members, and we send out emails periodically from influential people that we're associated with, like Bono. There is no question that getting an email from Bono is going to make you open that. You cannot use that very often. If you do that every week, it will die. People will stop noticing. Many people here get emails, I'm sure, on political lists. The first time that you see an email in your inbox from the President of the United States, you open it. The second time, maybe. So you have to think about that. A second thing, this isn't the second in order of priority, but it's something I'm really excited and interested in at the moment, is using things like color and emojis. And that works with a certain segment of our user base. And you've seen it a lot on political emails over the last year. Having a colorful a flag or a colorful emoji in the subject line will help it get noticed. I don't think that's the second in order of priority. I just think it's sexy and interesting. Subject lines are really important. Test them out. It depends on your market. Is it better to ask a question? Is it better to have a simple, short statement of what you're doing? Is it better to have something that's tantalizing and clickbaity, which may work the first couple of times, but over time may not be so effective? In terms of the email, keep it short. Have the ask at the top. Make it clear why you're sending it. If you don't have an ask, people may say, well, why are you sending me an email? Why did I open this? On the other hand, with some audiences, some user bases, that's great. People want to be kept informed. They want to know what's going on. Lastly, a slightly more complicated thing, but worth doing. Think about the sequence of emails that the user is getting. Maybe appoint somebody within the staff to actually look at it from a user perspective. Ask your relatives, ask your friends, what are they seeing? What did they actually get the thing in the first place? When they got it, did it make sense to them? Did they understand why they were being sent it and what they were being asked to do? You can use friends, you can use testing companies. Those are some very quick and simple things.
One last question.
Thank you. Some of the CEOs of InterAction, we actually launched an initiative called Global Youth Initiative. And the objective is how do you empower the young population on 4 topics. Violence against women, terrorism, intolerance, what's happening in the US and outside the world. So my question, I got the expert here, I thought I will ask you, we have 2 audience. One is, of course, online audience in many countries, but another group of audience, they have no online connection. So I will hold that for another discussion. But my question to any of you, you have any experience, we are launching a global youth expression contest to get their ideas on the topic I just mentioned. If any of you have any ideas of arranging or involving in any of this, reaching the young population, I would like to hear it. Base audience is, again, how do you reach out to the younger population? And that means high school all the way to 30-something.
Well, gosh, the only thing, again, just living in my bubble and thinking about Twitter and doing outreach, provided you're willing to do outreach and not just this kind of passive, we have a website and we have an email and sign up and get it. I have done some social media trainings in different parts of the world, and it's always a humbling experience because when I take my US experience and talk in front of 50 people in Malaysia, they have a completely different time frame of how they experience the internet. And so what I would do is I would pick maybe 5 countries where you're going to tailor.
That's what they're doing,
Yeah, and then I would go online and look for the hashtag for that country, and then maybe hashtag that country youth. I would research, I'd spend some time, I'd pick maybe one person and say, you do this country, you do this country, you do this country, and then come up, with the top 25 points about what are they talking about, what are the top 10 youth organizations in that country. I would then like them on Facebook. I would try to build relationships with those 10 NGOs in that country. I would call them out on Twitter and just start to have that conversation already there. Now, if you have a budget, of course, there's traditional advertising. You can do that sort of thing. But grassroots kind of marketing is get in there and find them because they're online, which means, again, maybe you're going to be on Twitter at 11 o'clock at night, right? Maybe you're going to be using Buffer to schedule things to go out at 2 a.m., which is what I do to try to, tweet on a 24-hour basis for different time zones. But that's the first thing that comes to mind is some research on social media itself in those time zones. And it's really fascinating for those of you, I know a lot of you travel for your work and you work in international development, just how the internet had different experiences all over the world. Like email is not a big deal at all in Australia and New Zealand in terms of fundraising. In Malaysia, it's almost like it's 2003 on the internet, right? So research each region and then tailor a campaign for outreach on social media for that area.
Yeah, I would just say one other thing is just look at the platforms, because if you talk to my 17-year-old nephew, he's like, oh, Facebook's for old people, so it's like really understanding like what platforms they're on, because maybe Facebook doesn't work and maybe Twitter in some cases doesn't work, and really spending the time, because I know some people mentioned Snapchat and they're trying to figure that out, but in addition to connecting with those folks, maybe you can just say, hey, we're thinking about doing this and partnering with them.
Folks, Heather, Melanie, Andy, superb, just superb. Thank you very much. Okay. Thanks so much for your time. Enjoy the rest of InterAction Forum. Go forth and collaborate.